Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unshaken. The Doctrine and Covenants is in our rear view mirror, which is crazy to say. Hopefully it's also off on the distant horizons as we're ready for the next time to start back over again. But we have officially concluded our study of the Doctrine and Covenants, and we have 2 more weeks this year. This week is on the Proclamation to the world on the family, and next week we'll talk about Christmas. So 'tis the season, right? But 'tis the season this week to talk about the family, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. In fact, I couldn't be more excited to talk about this based on some things that have been happening in my family recently. My oldest son, who many of you have kind of grown up with over the last 6 years of Unshaken, you were with me when he went on his mission and then came back, and some amazing things in his life. Well, he just got engaged, and we couldn't be more excited. His fiance, we love as much as he does. In fact, I had to reassure him when they were starting to date, said, "Son, we love your girlfriend probably as much as you do, and take that as a compliment that we share your taste and that we honor your decision. But we do honor your decision. We're not marrying her. We'd love to, but if you choose not to, it's on you, okay? And we're not gonna disown you just so that we can take her, though we were tempted." I'm so grateful it's all worked out, and they're excited to be able to start their lives together as husband and wife and begin a family. It's amazing. In fact, it was fun that he let us, me and my wife and several of our children, help with the shock and awe moment of the proposal. And we had set up kind of string lights in this kind of bushy area across the street from a temple, and they were going to be coming out of an endowment session and walking by. And then we were supposed to plug in the extension cord, and then boom, shock and awe, there's the light. He drops to one knee, he pops the question. It was going to be beautiful. And I remember there was just a little bit of adjustment I needed to make. And I was there in the bushes trying to fix some things. And all of a sudden I hear them coming. I'm like, no. I needed 5 more minutes. I didn't have those 5 minutes. And so I just grabbed the ends of the extension cord and literally dove into the bushes and just waited for them as they came in. It was so much fun. Everyone was involved and just we're thrilled with it all. But it's amazing to see this next step. As soon as I got released from my calling as primary chorister, my desire to be a grandpa rose precipitously. I mean, it escalated quickly, because I miss those little primary kids. But to be able to see grandchildren on the horizon, many of you are already in that stage and have told me how wonderful it is. And we look forward to all of that. It's funny because 4 years ago, when we finished the Doctrine and Covenants, we also taught the Proclamation, or we studied the Proclamation to the family and Come Follow Me then also. But 4 years ago, my life was so slammed. That's not uncommon. But my life was so crazy, and Christmas was approaching, and I had no time for anything. And so I justified my choice by saying, well, technically it's not in the scriptures, and so I'm just going to let people study the Proclamation on their own, and I'm not going to take another week and prepare a lesson and film it and post it. I just don't have the time. And so I skipped this lesson 4 years ago. I'm sorry. But what was interesting is in the aftermath, I saw some comments from people that said, "Oh, yeah, Halverson probably doesn't believe in the doctrines of the Proclamation on the family. That's why he skipped it." And I just remember thinking, "Are you kidding me? I have a firm testimony of the family as one of the central parts of God's eternal plan. I have a firm testimony of marriage between husband and wife, of having children, of all that we're going to study today. And I'm sad that I didn't get to prove that 4 years ago, but I'll try to prove it as well as I can today." It's interesting because in 1995, I was 20 years old. The Proclamation to the World on the Family came out. It was announced and read by President Hinckley in the women's session of General Conference. And I remember at the time, it was all this kind of fanfare of a proclamation to the world. And I remember it kind of falling flat, at least on my ears, because I considered it doctrine. Like, he read it and I'm like, well, yeah, everybody believes that, right? Well, wrong. And what we didn't know, at least what I didn't know, were things on the horizon that prophets, seers, and revelators were seeing and trying to prepare us for as a church. In fact, It's interesting, a year and a half before that, at the April General Conference of 1994, President Boyd K. Packer said this: "This crisis of the family is no surprise to the church." Well, it kind of was to me. I didn't know that the family was in crisis. In 1994, what kinds of crises were we facing on the family front? Well, nothing like we've seen in the past 30 years since. But he went on and said, "We have certainly known what was coming. I know of no better testimony that we are led by prophets than our preparation for this present emergency." Emergency. Wow. To think about the alarms sounding in Salt Lake as prophets, seers, and revelators have their finger on the pulse of the world and trying to foresee what the future might hold, in this case for the family. Like I said, it was doctrine in 1995. The fact that it has become such a controversial statement 30 years later lets us know just how ahead of its time it was, how prophetic a document it is. And I'm grateful to have had that guidance and to still have it now. I joke sometimes with my colleagues at BYU who teach the Eternal Family course, which basically takes what we're going to study this week and stretch it into an entire semester. All kinds of amazing social science findings and sociology and psychology and gender dynamics and so many things that the proclamation to the world on the family helps bring to the fore. I sometimes joke with those colleagues, man, in these days, you deserve hazard pay to teach that class. This is a tough one, and especially among the rising generation as they are wrestling with changing social dynamics at a pace that we've never seen in human history, to normalize things that we did not consider normal a generation ago. These are challenges that the rising generation is facing, and that we of the past generation are going to need to help them navigate. And I hope that as we strengthen our testimonies of this doctrine, we'll be able to teach with conviction. It's amazing to me that President Oaks, in that first talk as interim president, as president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, but as leading the church before he was set apart as president, he talked about the family. This is a doctrine of incredible importance, and I hope that our study this week will help us understand why. Now, there are 9 paragraphs, and so I'll kind of refer to pull up a copy for yourself. There's a part of me that wishes we had it canonized, so it was right there in our scriptures with us. But pull up a copy, and I'll count off the paragraphs, and we'll go through them in more or less chronological order. There's a logical flow throughout these paragraphs, I think, though I'm going to be jumping around a little bit to give us 7 different topics that I hope will help us wrap our heads and hearts around this incredible document. Okay? To put it in perspective, though, let me start with a story that I often tell, or an analogy I often use with my students at BYU. It's my non-member class, full of athletes and international students from all around the world. And particularly the athletes, especially the football players I have in class, I always use this analogy with them, and it's one of those days in class that I have them in the palm of my hand, because I'm using a football analogy. With all these great Division I football players, I'll ask them, I want you to imagine playing the game of football with a different goal in mind. No different rules, but a different definition of victory. Right now, how do you know which team wins? And the obvious answer, points. That's all that matters. Now, we take statistics on all kinds of other parts of the game, but none of those matter as far as the win or loss column is concerned. Points and points alone determines victory. Well, I say to them, imagine if I changed the definition of success. Now, I'm not going to change any rules, but I want you to brainstorm, how are you going to change the strategy of the game? What kind of plays are you going to call? And here's the new definition of success. It's no longer which team has the most points. It's the team with the greater time of possession. It's all that matters. If my team has the ball for 30 minutes and 1 second and the other team has it for 29:59, I win, no matter how many or how few points I may have scored. Okay? Are you with me? That's the only thing that matters. Time of possession. Now, how are you going to change the game? It's amazing to watch the football players' minds starting to race. The running backs' eyes light up as they're like, whoa, we're going to run the ball all the time. That's awesome. We're not going to pass much. Sorry, receivers. But any dropped pass or incomplete stops the clock, and we can't have that. We're not going to be going out of bounds. At all costs, we're trying to avoid that. And I said, well, what about the first down? Like, you running backs, how far are you going to go every play? And they realize, oh, I do still have to get a first down, but I want to wait till fourth down to get it. I want to average about 2.5 yards per play. And I'm going to do a lot of side-to-side running instead of up and down, straight downfield. I asked the defensive backs, let's say you get an interception. It's probably going to be rare since the other team's not going to throw much either. But if you get a pick, what are you going to do? And it's fun to watch them, their brains go, I'm probably going to run backwards and then down the ball at like the 1 yard line so that my offense now has 99 yards to chew up the clock. Do you see how completely it turns the game on its head without changing a single rule? Redefining victory determines how you play the game. This has happened twice in 2 different semesters where I'll ask one of the receivers. And receivers are kind of the divas of the offense. Said, you're not going to get the ball much, but say you do catch a pass. What are you going to do? And one year, the young man just looked up, kind of flexing and like, I'm scoring, man. And all of his buddies are like, no, you idiot. That's not the point. He's like, what? I'm a receiver. I score. And they're like, that's not the way we're playing the game. And it clicks for them. They understand how you define victory determines the play of the game. Now, what on earth does this have to do with the gospel? As I try to explain to them, once I've got them in the palm of my hand, what is the purpose of life? Depending on what you define as life's purpose, that's going to determine how you play life's game. So what is the purpose of it all? I bring up some P's as a possibility. Is it prosperity? Is it popularity? Is it pride? Is it prestige? Are those the purposes of life? If they are, you're going to play a certain game to achieve them. If, on the other hand, let's take some F's instead of P's. What if the purpose of life has more to do with faith and family than popularity and prestige and prosperity? There's a different kind of game we'll play. And as we wrestle with that in class, to help them understand from a Latter-day Saint perspective why we place so much emphasis on the family, for us, it's one of the central purposes of life. And if we keep that in mind, we will play the game differently by prioritizing family no matter what. With that in mind, look at how the proclamation to the world begins. First paragraph. We, the first presidency and the council of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that should get our attention right there. We're going to have 15 signatures at the bottom of this document. It is prophetic, start to finish. So the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 solemnly proclaim that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God, and that the family is central to the Creator's plan for the eternal destiny of his children. So right there from the very get-go, for opening paragraph, marriage and family, those are key. They are ordained of God. They are central to God's plan. Those are the things we are aiming for. It's not about the points scored. It's about the time of possession. And I want to possess my family in righteousness forever. Eternal family. This is what matters to us. Later, when you look at the beginning of the 7th paragraph, it repeats some of this. The family is ordained of God. And then later in that paragraph, marriage between man and woman is essential to his eternal plan. So what we're seeing, in some ways, the first paragraph is introductory to what follows. And we're going to come back to the importance of marriage. We're going to come back to the importance of family. But to see them as central to the Father's plan for us, what is that plan? How do we play the game? How are we defining victory? Well, here's the plan. Look at the beginning of paragraph 3. In the premortal realm, spirit sons and daughters knew and worshiped God as their eternal Father, and accepted his plan by which his children could obtain a physical body and gain earthly experience to progress toward perfection, and ultimately realize their divine destiny as heirs of eternal life. Now that is a packed paragraph. But if you notice the repetition of the kinds of language as sons, daughters, eternal Father, his children, to picture, no wonder the family is so central on earth. It's central to the Father's plan from premortality onward. We are spirit sons and daughters of heavenly parents. We'll see that taught clearly in this document as well. And if we think of premortality as, a premortal family home evening, and yes, like many family home evenings on earth, it ended with a fight. We've got the war in heaven. But what are we fighting over? The opportunity to follow our parents' plan, to be able to come and, yes, struggle with agency. And that's going to be one of the difficult things that we're going to wrestle with as we entwine these agencies and come together to try to live. But talk about an educational experience. Talk about a preparatory state for life with the same sociality. To be able to wrestle with the natural man and woman within ourselves and with those with whom we live. Talk about an opportunity to gain earthly experience of the best kind and of the hardest kind, all there within the walls of our own home. To think about the need to obtain a physical body, something that we didn't have there. In fact, if we picture this premortal family council, which is what it was, and to have divine exalted parents explaining to us, their children, how much they love us, but how unlike them we are. And the only way to be with them and like them is to leave them for a time and come to earth to be able to practice mortal family life in order to prepare ourselves for immortal family life with one massive family of God. To see what that is going to entail in the rest of the proclamation, the kind of family life we should engage in, the way that children are premortal spirit, children of God, are invited into the world and given a physical body, the kind of earthly experiences we need to help them have so that they can progress towards perfection in a positive way. Again, this paragraph, like the first one, is so beautifully introductory to all that follows, but it puts in perspective why we do what we do. This is not just some kind of sociological structure for economic purposes, and that's why we're going, or even just a biological necessity to provide for children. Family life is so much bigger than that. It goes far beyond sociology. It is theology. It is the plan of heavenly parents. And if we can understand it in that context, we'll be prepared to live family life in the way the Lord would have us do. The fact that it's so central to the Father's plan lets us know that it's also going to be central to the adversary's plan. If we know that the name of the game is time of possession, then the defense knows that too. And the opposition will do all that it can to ruin family life. In fact, in that talk that I referenced earlier, April Conference 1994, President Boyd K. Packer, he said, the ultimate purpose of the adversary is to disrupt, disturb, and destroy the home and the family. Like a ship without a rudder, without a compass, we drift from the family values which have anchored us in the past. Now we are caught in a current so strong that unless we correct our course, civilization as we know it will surely be wrecked to pieces. If that's not sobering, I don't know what is. And so as they warn and forewarn, as they see challenging storm clouds on the horizon, are we ready to move forward in faith to win the game that the Lord has placed before us? Last thing I'll say on this topic, as far as the family's role within the plan, when I was a a new father, my wife and I were in a married student ward at BYU, and there's a lot of those. We had a regional conference or some kind of conference where all the married student wards and stakes at BYU got together, and President Henry B. Eyring of the Quorum of the 12 at the time came to speak to us. It was loud in the Marriott Center on campus at BYU. Lots of crying babies, okay? Tons of newlyweds, tons of newborn children, and it was loud. Imagine having sacrament meeting in the nursery instead of the chapel. Well, it was loud to the point of almost like embarrassment. And at one point, Elder Irene paused and said, "I just want you all to be absolutely silent and listen for a moment." And I honestly thought, he's going to chew us out for not being able to keep our children reverent. Like, stock the Cheerios, honey, and start force feeding, okay? Get the binky back in. But no, as we sat in parental silence, but loud children and crying babies, President Irene let the sound fill the auditorium and then smiled and said, "That is the sound of the plan of salvation at work." Now, what a sound. What a sound. What a blessing to know the plan and know that our family life is a central part of it. Now, let's go logically through the rest of this proclamation and see how these other elements fit within that broad umbrella. Okay? For this next one, I want to talk about gender. And to do so, let me set the stage by describing something that seems to be very popular these days that didn't exist back in my generation or prior ones. Have you ever been to a gender reveal party where someone somebody knows, right? They got the ultrasound and they know if they're having a little boy or a little girl, and they've stocked either the blue balloons or the pink ones, the blue confetti or the pink, the blue smoke or the pink smoke, or twins, Let's have one of each. It's an exciting thing. I am impressed with people that decide to wait and not know the gender of the baby until birth. Me, I want to know so I can at least gear up and prepare myself a little bit better, okay? But gender reveal is fascinating because it helps us realize that from the start, that is something we are intensely focused on. It is something we want to know. We want to know in broad strokes, what kind of an experience will this child have upon the earth? Now, I'll admit that this has become more and more controversial over the last 30 years. And the idea of gender being simply a socially constructed illusion, a figment of our imagination, something that we simply decide or determine on our own, those are things that have become increasingly popular beliefs in our day. It's interesting because to a degree, there's truth in terms of much of gender construction is socially constructed. In fact, I laugh at the blue and the pink because those colors are not set in stone. In fact, for much of human history, at least since the Virgin Mary became a popular icon within Catholicism, baby blue was a feminine color, not a masculine one. And so colors and certain preferences, that is not set in stone. That is not something that is a direct result of one's biological sex at birth. But there are key parts of gender that we have to keep clear in our minds. That there is not the kind of, I'm trying to be careful with what I say. I'm trying to love and honor and not offend. I'm trying to balance the law of chastity with the law of charity. Love and law, truth and tolerance are all contraries that we have to prove whenever we're dealing with gender issues and sexuality issues and so forth. Please keep that in mind in everything we study in the proclamation this week. We can hold to the laws of God, and we can be loving to those who do not agree with those laws or are not living them at the time. We can strive for that balance and flex some muscles to be able to be on the balance beam, okay? But notice what the proclamation clearly says about gender. Second paragraph, all human beings, male and female, are created in the image of God. There's Genesis right from the start, and that men have no greater claim on the image of God than women do. We believe in heavenly parents, plural, a masculine divine, a feminine divine, and therefore a masculine mortal and a feminine mortal, male and female, okay? Both created in the image of heavenly parents. Each is a beloved spirit son or daughter of heavenly parents. And again, the S there at the end of parent is key. Plural parents. Divine masculine, divine feminine. And beloved children that are also gendered spiritually in premortality. It goes on, as such, each has a divine nature and destiny. Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. That's key. If it's essential, this is not some peripheral part of our existence. This is central to who we are and who we've been and who we will always be. We believe in gender deity. I remember when I was at divinity school writing this massive research paper for a professor that was tough as nails, and I knew she was going to shred me for anything I said amiss. And one of the things that we learned, it was a very liberal divinity school, is you do not use gendered pronouns for God. Don't make God a male. God is without body, parts, and passions, says the Westminster Confession. And since God is unknowable, we're not going to talk about God or himself. We're going to talk about God and God's self and avoid any inkling of gendered pronouns when it comes to deity. Well, that's not my doctrine. That's not what I believe. I believe in a gendered Father in heaven and a gendered Mother in heaven as well. And in this paper, I was writing about God, and I gendered my pronouns. I had to include an explanatory footnote to make sure that my professor knew that I was not being lazy or misogynistic. I was not bowing to the patriarchy with this statement. I was being careful, but I was being true to the doctrine that I believe in. And she didn't complain at all. She drew attention to the footnote I included to say, I'm glad that you explained yourself, that you have a theological leg to stand on. From your perspective, not from hers or others, but from our perspective, I was teaching that based on belief and true doctrine, okay? Now, if we understand that about heavenly parents and then accept that of ourselves, it was interesting, at that same time period at divinity school, I was part of an interfaith panel, and we'd get together every year and have Catholics and Protestants and Buddhists and Hindus and Catholic and Muslims and Jews and Latter-day Saints and Wiccans and atheists and this whole panel, and we'd address some kind of common issue from our own unique perspectives. And then we'd open it up to Q&A from the public. One of those years we were talking about gender and what each faith had to say about gender. And I, as the representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was so grateful for that paragraph in the Proclamation. That was one that my entire message was centered on, that gender is part of our premortal identity. As a male today, I was a male. I've always been a male and will always be a male. My wife has always been female and will always be female. And to be able to embrace that perspective and to see that gender is not something that we just endure for our mortal time and then shrug it off to go on in some kind of an existence. No, Christ gave us the example of a physical resurrection. A resurrection with a perfected mortal, or now immortal body, which means biological sex, gender, is part of that eternal identity and will serve an eternal purpose. I will confess, I don't know all that entails. When I think about our need to prove contraries and balance opposites, with male, female being one of the deepest, most profound, most significant contraries of them all, the need to develop as best I can both sides of those. Remember what Harold B. Lee's daughter said about her parents? I'm grateful that I had a father who was gentle beneath his firmness and a mother that was firm beneath her gentleness, that they were trying to balance themselves as well as counterbalance one another. I know I need to fully develop the feminine attributes and my wife is trying to develop the masculine attributes. I believe that our parents in heaven are a perfect combination of all of those attributes. However, if there is still some divine purpose in our specific genders, again, I don't know all that entails, but to be able to wrestle with that and to ponder that and to appreciate that difference, that God has given his daughters and his sons different gifts. And for us to be created in the image of divine parents, with certain aspects of that image more pronounced based on if you are a daughter of a heavenly mother or a son of a heavenly father. This is powerful doctrine. And if we understand the creation of us all, and in the creation account, this division between light and darkness, this division between sea and land, this division between male and female, creation allows for that distinction and division. The fall complicates those differences to the point that we begin to separate even further from one another. But that allows for the atonement to allow those differences to become complementary instead of competitive, for us to become truly one with one another as we become one with God. Gender is a powerful principle. And in some ways, when we see the differences between them coming together into a family unit, neither is the man without the woman nor the woman without the man in the Lord. Well, in the Lord suggests it's not just in earth or in this life that's going to matter. So let's logically take a step forward and talk about what happens when a man and a woman come together in the Lord and create an eternal family. To me, the saddest language that occurs in a wedding is the phrase, "till death do you part." You can tell that in some ways, even reverends and priests are uncomfortable with that language. The D word, death, sounds pretty final. And so sometimes they soften it with language like, "I pronounce you husband and wife for as long as you both shall live." And I think, well, that sounds a little nicer, but doesn't that mean the same thing? It's still parting at death. Sometimes they'll say, for the period of your mortal lives, which again is admitting that anything beyond the mortal life, I got nothing I can say there. To me, it's interesting that there's an acknowledgement, an admission on the part of whoever is officiating at the marriage that they have authority over what happens here, but no authority with what happens on the other side of death. To wrestle with that, to picture the Grim Reaper standing kind of off screen at a wedding, picture the pastor or the minister saying, is there anyone that is there anything that would stand in the way? Anyone that objections? And to picture the Grim Reaper raise his scythe and say, well, I'll let it slide for a time, but as soon as one of them dies, I step in and I end this marriage. Now, thankfully, that is not what we believe. We believe in a sealing power. We believe in Elijah's return in the Kirtland Temple to give the keys of the kingdom to Joseph Smith and his successors so that they could bind on earth and have it bound in heaven, loose on earth and have it loosed in heaven, that God would honor that authority. And to picture one with the sealing power be able to stare down death and ask, as Paul did, about the resurrection, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" When it comes to eternal family, when sealed by proper authority, there is no sting at death. There is no eternal victory of the grave. So we learn in the third paragraph of the proclamation. The divine plan of happiness enables family relationships to be perpetuated beyond the grave. Sacred ordinances and covenants available in holy temples make it possible for individuals to return to the presence of God and for families to be united eternally. To me, it's interesting that the two halves of that closing statement, We usually picture, oh yeah, the temple allows us to have an eternal family, but it also allows us to be part of God's eternal family. It enables us to return to God's presence. That in and of itself would be incredible blessing. That's in fact the highest blessing that those of other faiths can imagine. But those within our faith can add an additional blessing to that. And that's not just to be returning to God to be part of his family, but remaining part of our earthly family in heaven. To think about all the time and the effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into creating a loving family on earth, a strong, mutually beneficial marriage, to see that happen and then to just end it. What was the point of all of that? If you think about what Paul said about resurrection, think of it in terms of eternal families as well. If in this life only I have hope in Christ, I'm of all men most miserable. So no matter how happy my family life is here, if this is all I get, that's not enough. I want more. Not in a greedy, selfish way. I want more time to be with those I love. I'll admit, before I got married, the thought of an eternal relationship was overwhelming. the picturing myself looking over at someone going, hey, honey, what do you think we'll be doing in 65 million years? Wow, doesn't that get old after a time? Well, then I met my wife and started wondering if eternity was going to be long enough to be able to spend that much time. And in fact, to remove time so that all we have is this glorious eternal now, and to be able to spend it with those that we love. That sounds like the purpose of life for me. And let me tell you a story that might help illustrate this, the power of this doctrine. What we just read in that brief paragraph, these ordinances of the temple, these covenants that we make, allows family relationships to be perpetuated. I was in Tennessee. I was speaking to another congregation of non-Latter-day Saints, and it was a big Q&A period. And I told them from the start, you can ask anything you want, and I have no feelings to hurt. Okay, I have soft heart, thick skin though. Ask whatever you want. And this one little old lady took me up on the offer, and she was mad. She was angry and asked me why she couldn't go into the temple. And as I asked a follow-up question, I realized why it was such a personal issue for her. Her granddaughter was a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when she was sealed in the temple, this loving grandmother was not allowed to go to the sealing. I tried to express my empathy for her, my compassion, understanding how hard that would be. And then as I was wondering how to explain this, the Spirit bailed me out and filled my mouth when I began to open it. You see, I was going to say, well, you have to have a temple recommend. And that the reason why that non-Latter-day Saints are not allowed to enter the temple is because you don't have the temple recommend. And the recommend establishes worthiness to be able to enter the temple. And as that was running through my head, luckily before I opened my mouth to say it, I realized, wait a minute, if I boil down temple readiness to temple worthiness, then what have I called every non-member, including this sweet little grandma? I've branded her unworthy, and that's not fair of me. She's probably just as worthy, if not more so, as anyone else that's in that sealing room watching her granddaughter make sacred covenants. So it can't just be worthiness. What else is it? And that's when the Spirit filled my mouth. And I said to this sweet lady, do you believe that Joseph Smith was visited by Elijah and given sealing authority to bind on earth and have it bound in heaven? She looked at me in disbelief like, wait, I'd never even heard of that. I know some of the strange beliefs of Latter-day Saints, but wow, you guys get stranger and stranger. I'm like, admitted, yeah, I'll own that. But do you believe that? And she said a little uncomfortably, no offense. And I said, none taken. I don't blame you for not believing that, but I do. Do you believe that Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God and that in the temple, that kind of sealing authority can be exercised? And again, she was apologetic, but said, no, I don't mean to hurt your feelings. You haven't. But I don't believe in that. That's fine. I do. Now, I need you to understand something about what happened to your granddaughter and her husband in the temple. And then all of a sudden, the story popped into my head that I'd never connected to this. And it was the raising of the daughter of Jairus from the dead. I reminded her of this story. She was a wonderful Christian woman there in her Christian congregation, so she knew the story well. And I said, do you remember what happened when Jesus and Peter, James, and John entered the room? And it's filled with people who are mourning. They love this little girl. They want to be with this little girl. They miss her, and they are mourning her loss. Jesus tells them something that they cannot believe. She's not dead. She only sleeps, and I'm here to wake her up, symbolically speaking. Well, what's the reaction? They laughed him to scorn. They didn't believe he could do that, and we can't blame them. Raising some from the dead, that's impossible. Or is it? Who actually went into the room where the body of Jairus' daughter lay? It was Jesus, Peter, James, and John, and mom and dad. Only those 6. Only those with faith to make the impossible possible. If you don't believe in that, I love you, you love her, you're worthy to be near. But I cannot allow doubt to enter this room. I need everyone to come and add their faith to the stockpile because what I'm about to do is impossible. But for God, all things are possible. With their collective faith, Jesus then took this girl by the hand and raised her to life again. And as I explained to this sweet grandmother, when I go to a ceiling in the temple, this is not a spectator sport. I'm not going just to watch and celebrate. No, that's at the reception, which you're invited to. I hope you come to. You, more than anyone, we want there to celebrate this incredible thing that happened, a marriage. But in the temple, it's not just a marriage. It's a sealing. There is a sealer there with priesthood authority to stare down death and refuse to say that they are married until death do they part. No, death, you cannot part them. That's impossible. Or is it? When I go to a temple ceiling, it's because I believe that what is being bound on earth is being bound in heaven. I believe that sealer has been given keys through prophetic, powerful authority. I believe that Joseph Smith was visited by Elijah in the Kirtland Temple. I believe what happens in the temple affects an eternity. And so when I go to watch this, I'm not just watching, I'm willing an eternal unit into existence. I'm adding my faith to the faith of those in that sealing room that is lifting up and sustaining the authority of the sealer as they pronounce a couple as an eternal one. As I tried to explain that to that sweet grandmother, she softened. And she understood what I was trying to convey. She basically admitted, how, when you put it that way, I guess I have no reason to be there. To me, that would simply be a make-believe marriage, a wedding that I'm not seeing the same thing that you are seeing. I suppose that if I go to the reception, when I went to the reception, my celebration, my joy could be as authentic as everyone else's. It wasn't worthiness that she was lacking. It was simply faith in the impossible. Well, my friends, we have faith in that possibility. In fact, in that probability. In fact, in that promise. And because of that, we can rest assured that the relationships that we have poured our lives into during mortality are relationships that we will enjoy for eternity. It's hard to imagine a greater blessing than that. And yet, when we think of that only in terms of the husband-wife relationship, we're missing out on the the multitudes of generations that stretch in both directions. Again, think of the ceiling room and the mirrors that face each other off into eternity. To see all of the roots of this family tree from which we come and all of the branches from this family tree that will then follow. It's an incredible blessing what we have in terms of eternal marriage, yes, but eternal increase and being able to have children with us forever. I heard a story years ago of a Latter-day Saint mother in a grocery store with a shopping cart full not just of food, but of her family, kids everywhere. And as she's pushing the cart through the store, someone kind of leans over, some stranger, and remarks on the size of this woman's family and kind of chides her for it and says, "What, are you trying to single-handedly overpopulate the planet?" And this wonderful Latter-day Saint mother, with a kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of smile and wink, said, "You know, I can't think of anyone better to do it." And just went on her way. Oh, I am so grateful for incredible Latter-day Saint families that are willing to invite as many members into that family as they can. My wife is one of 10 children. I'm one of 6. We had hoped to have a family as big as my wife's, and then found out on pregnancy number 5 that every single one of my wife's pregnancies had been high risk. We didn't know that until with the previous 4. Ignorance was bliss. And on that 5th one, I had to give my wife a shot in the abdomen every day of the pregnancy to keep her alive and safe, and the baby alive and safe as well. Well, that changed our family dynamic, and we realized that every one of our 5 children is a miracle. But that's true of every child. Children are miracles. And so why not invite miracles into our home? In the Proclamation, if you look at the 4th paragraph, notice who's the starring role here. The first commandment that God gave to Adam and Eve pertained to their potential for parenthood as husband and wife. We declare that God's commandment for his children to multiply and replenish the earth remains in force. So again, we're back in the Garden of Eden. So much, the Lord set it out from the very beginning. He was going to separate male and female, but make them such a part of each other that they would need one another to complete each other. He was going to pronounce them husband and wife even before they partook of the forbidden fruit, which means their marriage was meant to last eternally. God couldn't say till death do you part because death was not in the vocabulary yet, okay? God always intended family to be forever, but he also intended it to be more than husband and wife alone. So what was his first commandment? Multiply and replenish the earth. If we talked about gender being part of our premortal identity and purpose, then we were premortal spirit children that needed to become physical children at some point. And so can we invite those children to come? There was a woman, a professor from Catholic University of America that came to speak at BYU just a few months ago. She had written a book called Hannah's Children. And it's a powerful concept of a woman, Hannah, in the Old Testament, that couldn't have children, but wanted them with all her heart. And this non-Latter-day Saint professor was wrestling with the opposite reality of people who biologically could easily have children, but were refusing to. Like as if the multiply and replenish no longer applied. That was not a blessing anymore. It was a burden, and a burden I would prefer to avoid. That book talks about women who choose to have large families, like Hannah of old. And when she came to BYU, she gave an incredible talk called Why Children Became Useless, Faith and the Future of the Family. If you go to BYU Speeches, you can listen to this from Dr. Catherine Ruth Pakaluk, or Pakaluk, excuse me, that's how you pronounce it. And Dr. Pakaluk taught, it was incredible. She talked about children are seen as horses now. And why would I have a horse when it's easier to just drive a car? And so children used to be an economic necessity, so people would have big families. But since they're no longer an economic necessity and instead an economic burden, Well, why would anybody do that? Well, because I want to be a parent and it's kind of fun. It's one thing to have a pet. It's another thing to have a child. That's kind of fun. But in that case, if it's just about you and what having this little child does for you, then you'll probably have one and done. And hey, technically I'm a parent. That's all I need. And Dr. Pekalik's concern was declining birth rates across the world, to the point that we can't even match our own. We're not even multiplying by one anymore, so let alone replenishing. We're multiplying by a fraction, and we're no longer reproducing fast enough to be able to replace ourselves. Now, if that's just an economic dilemma, that's one thing, but it's a spiritual dilemma to Latter-day Saints who understand the plan and its purpose. To be able to see the blessing of having children, and the desire to invite children into our world, into our families. If you look at the 5th paragraph at the end, it adds another aspect of this. We affirm the sanctity of life and of its importance in God's eternal plan. For that sanctity of life, we could talk about abortion. Again, the need to multiply and replenish and honor the life of a child that we invited into existence. The choice was made in the act of conception. And while we believe in certain exceptions to the rule, we believe in the rule. And the rule is to honor the sanctity of life and avoid abortion, except in possible cases of rape, incest, or when the life of the mother and or child are in danger. Even in those instances, make it a matter of prayer, because it's life that we're talking about. And for us to be able to be careful about how we are inviting life and then honoring life once it has been invited. That's one aspect of that sanctity of life. We could add to that suicide and the need to help people who are struggling with suicidal ideation to stay alive, to honor the sanctity of their own lives. When we think about end-of-life care, and we think about hospice and so forth, are we avoiding euthanasia? Are we understanding the sanctity of life on that end of things? Life's start and mortal life's end. Are we honoring the sanctity of life? In the 6th paragraph, how about this part? Husband and wife have a solemn responsibility to love and care for each other, there's the marriage side, and for their children, there's the family side. And then the only verse that we actually quote from Scripture in the Proclamation, from the Psalms, children are an heritage of the Lord. Do we see them as such? Yes, there is an added burden. That's obvious. But talk about an added blessing that more than makes up for it. This is an heritage of the Lord, a gift from the Creator who allows us to create life along with Him. It goes on, parents have a sacred duty. This is not just some kind of economic opportunity. It's a sacred duty to rear their children in love and righteousness, to provide for their physical and spiritual needs, both of those, and to teach them to love and serve one another, observe the commandments of God, and be law-abiding citizens wherever they live. To think about each element of that. Am I rearing my children? Do they know that I love them? Am I striving to be as righteous in my parenting as I possibly can? Am I meeting their spiritual needs as much as their physical? Or are we offloading half of that to the church? No, this is something I need to take personal responsibility for. Am I teaching them to love? Am I teaching them to serve? Am I teaching them the 2 great commandments and holding my family close to the cross, the vertical as well as the horizontal? It goes on, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers will be held accountable before God for the discharge of these obligations. That's how serious this is. God trusts us with His children. And is there anything higher and holier that He could offer us than that? I felt so overwhelmed and intimidated as I was leaving the hospital with my firstborn child. and feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. I remember when our labor and delivery nurse, her shift ended and she was leaving, and we're like, no, we don't know how to parent without you. But then to put the baby in the car seat and put the car seat in the car and make sure the buckles were all in place, we're driving away from what I thought was safety. And I just can only imagine what my daughter was feeling at the time. Like, that's Dad? He looks a little shell-shocked. Mom? She looks like she can handle things. But to think about the divine responsibility we are under, to give these children the best possible chance. Talk about a blessing and talk about a responsibility. I remember making this a mental exercise once when I was wrestling with differences between genders and male and female and trying to picture the tug of war that often goes on between men and women. And there's an old saying about who wears the pants in the family, which unfortunately is a nod to kind of a patriarchal approach that, well, it's the pants, it's not the dress. So who wears the pants in the family? It's a man's world, and they're supposed to be in charge. And I'm like, that's not how the Lord would have it be. So what would life look like if men ran the show? Ooh, that's scary. What would life be like if only women ran the show? Ooh, that's equally scary on the opposite side. So no wonder we need equality, and we're going to talk about that in a moment in the proclamation. But this is the part that blew me away. What if asking male versus female is the wrong question when it comes to family dynamics? What if the real question is parent versus child? Not father versus mother, not male versus female, parent versus child. And if life revolves around the parents, what does life look like? And what are the chances that a child is going to be able to thrive in life or even come to earth to begin with? Or flip it, if the center of the family is the child and their needs and putting them first, not at the absolute expense of parents. No, we're proving the contrary here as well. But if parents are there for the children and not children there for the parent, how does that change the dynamics of family life and home? Perhaps the question is not who wears the pants in the family, but who wears the diaper? If we can wrestle with that and put our focus on this rising generation, I think we'll be better people and not just better parents. Now, there's an aspect of that the proclamation hits hard next. Because if children are an heritage of the Lord, then the power to bring those children into the world is as sacred as any power could be. And how we exercise that power, what the boundaries and the limits that the Lord has established for safe use of a power that God himself wields, that's going to be incredibly important in all that we do as far as the family is concerned. Thus, the importance of the law of chastity. When I was in college, I remember our bishop came to visit the elders quorum. And we'd heard before that it was the day where he was going to give the talk. And the bishop was going to come in with guns a-blazing and warn us and forewarn us college students, men, to be careful with how we treated the sons of God needed to be careful with how they treated the daughters of God. I'll put it that way. Well, we were bracing ourselves for a hellfire and brimstone kind of singe the eyebrows, you better be careful. The bishop came in, and I guess he knew that we were expecting it. And so he said, yes, brethren, I'm here to talk about the law of chastity. But here's the issue. I'm worried that none of you guys could break the law of chastity even if you wanted to. And we're like, huh? It was the weirdest chastity talk I'd ever heard. He said, yeah, you guys don't go on dates. The girls in the Relief Society are just sitting at home on Friday and Saturday night wondering what's wrong with them, and none of you are asking them out. Now, of course, keep the law of chastity. But take a girl out, would you? And if you ever hope to get married, then dating is part of the process that gets you there. Like I said, it was the strangest chastity talk I ever heard, but it was a memorable one. Most of the other ones I've heard and participated in are much more close to what you would have expected about making sure the powers of procreation are used only within the limits God has set. The proclamation to the world on the family makes that crystal clear. If you look, for example, at the 4th paragraph at the end, we further declare that God has commanded that the sacred powers of procreation are to be employed only between man and woman, lawfully wedded as husband and wife. It's interesting to think about chastity as defined in those terms. It has to be a lawful marriage. There has to be a covenant in place so that the powers of procreation, the sacred powers of procreation, can be used within the bounds the Lord has set. It has to be between man and woman so that procreation can lead to creation, so that there is life within that act as you are inviting God to participate in an act of creation. Perhaps better said, God is inviting us to participate in that act ourselves. To me, to think about, actually reminds me, I had a student once ask, they thought it was odd that chastity would be on the level of a temple covenant. Like the ones that we make in the endowment, sacrifice and obedience and the gospel and consecration, those are general enough and broad enough that it seems like, yes, these would be culminating covenants. But chastity? Does it belong there? And as I wrestle with that, I thought, well, on a symbolic level, definitely, because chastity throughout Scripture is also used as a metaphor for our allegiance to God. If I'm not faithful to my covenants with God, then I am cheating on Him. Infidelity in our covenants to God, and using infidelity in our covenants to our spouse as a metaphor for that. So I thought maybe that's why it's included. But then the more I thought of it, while that is true, I believe, I think the literal interpretation of the law of chastity as we promise to keep it in the temple, I think it deserves to be up there. Just before we consecrate all we have to God, we make sure that we are offering certain things only to the person we are sealed to, married to. If you think about Jacob chapter 3, for example, when Jacob says to Nephite men that were starting to labor to rationalize immorality themselves, Jacob compares them to the Lamanites and says, the Lamanites have a lot of challenges. They struggle spiritually in a lot of ways, but one sin they're not committing is immorality. Their husbands love their wives and love their children. Lamanites are a better example of chastity and family unity than the Nephites were in that moment. And Jacob made the promise, for that act alone, God will preserve them. Fascinating to think of chastity as a covenant that is significant enough that if you're keeping that one, God will be patient as you work on other promises, as you repent of other sins. This is something that is so key. If you think about the talk that Elder Holland gave when he was BYU president, here's a chastity talk to all the elders' quorums and relief societies on campus. Of souls, symbols, and sacraments, it was called. And to think about chastity and sexuality as a union of soul, not just body. Of soul's symbols, to think of the symbol of sexuality and the sacrament of sexuality. Remember, these are sacred powers of procreation. And to honor the sacredness of that? In fact, if you go ahead and look at the 5th paragraph, see the beginning. We declare the means by which mortal life is created. So there's sexuality, intimacy within a marriage. Those means, we believe them to be divinely appointed. So we get the sacred powers of procreation, and we get the divine appointment of marital intimacy. I worry that sometimes when we give our children the talk, Well, first of all, the fact that we call it the talk at all is hugely problematic because that's a singular noun. The talk? You think you can explain something of such significance and complexity as human sexuality in one uncomfortable conversation, between two people, neither of whom want to be part of it? That's a problem. We have to do a better job of understanding what kinds of questions our children might have, what they're hearing from outside, unfortunately, and for us to be able to present the positive perspective on sexuality instead of a counterfeit version from the world or simply a negative version from us. If we can help our children understand the sacred powers of procreation and the fact that marital intimacy is divinely appointed, then I hope that our children can enter their marriage seeing the gift that God is now offering them and a gift that they are now offering one another. That this is a beautiful thing, that it is an opportunity for oneness of body and spirit so that souls come together in a union that allows life to take place, creation itself. If you look forward near the end of the 7th paragraph, notice this law of chastity from the child's perspective, which I sometimes don't think we think about. It says, children are entitled to birth within the bonds of matrimony and to be reared by a father and a mother who honor marital vows with complete fidelity. That's something they're entitled to. A child, in some ways, is already taking a massive leap of faith just to agree to join us overwhelmed, inadequate parents. But if we can offer that child the safety and security of parental love, parental unity, parental chastity, what's the old saying from David O. McKay? The greatest gift a father can give his children is to love their mother and to give those children the safety and security of a covenant relationship, that your mom and I love each other. And we always have and we always will. That we are true to one another. And hopefully that means you can trust that we will be true to you as well. There's no one else. It's only her or only him. And you are the living embodiment of that reality. There's something beautiful there. If you look at the 8th paragraph, here's the flip side. We warn that individuals who violate covenants of chastity, who abuse spouse or offspring, or who fail to fulfill family responsibilities will one day stand accountable before God. That describes both sins of commission, like abuse or the violation of covenants, but also sins of omission if we fail to fulfill family responsibilities. We already saw what our children deserve from us as we love and teach them to love and serve one another, help them become good citizens, provide for them physically as well as spiritually. They deserve that from us. And if we are not giving that to them, then we're responsible. If you think back to section 68 of the Doctrine and Covenants, when there are parents in Zion that do not teach their children to understand the gospel, then that's the sins on the head of the parents. Remember, that's a verse not about parents teaching, but about children understanding. It's results, not just actions that we're after. And so to understand that God holds parents responsible for the way they offer their children life and love and all the support that they're going to need, including chastity on their part and raising their children to be chaste as well. Any tear that comes as a result of sins of commission or omission are tears that the Lord himself will wipe away. But that means those are tears that he is well aware of. And we need to avoid causing that weeping any chance we can. I remember a conversation I had with my son as he was hitting those teenage years. And we'd had the talk multiple times so that they were talks and they were not uncomfortable. And it got to a point where he brought up something, And a quote came to my mind that I had not shared with him before. Elder Holland quoted this in his Soul, Symbols, and Sacraments talks, or when he repeated that talk, once given to BYU students, then now given to the entire church in General Conference in October of 1998. I still remember the date because I got married in February of 1999. So it was the one conference that I remember while I was engaged. And when Elder Holland taught chastity, you better believe I was paying attention. It's a quote from a husband and wife pair of non-Latter-day Saint historians, Will and Ariel Durant, who were studying all of human history, basically, and then taking lessons that they learned from the process and putting in a book called The Lessons of History. Now, this was written at the end of the 60s, and so sexual revolution, kind of societal norms in total chaos. And this is what these non-Latter-day Saint historians said as a result of their studies. No man, however brilliant or well-informed, can come in one lifetime to such fullness of understanding as to safely judge and dismiss the customs or institutions of his society. For these are the wisdom of generations after centuries of experiment in the laboratory of history. Now, so far, that's a general statement. And these historians are basically saying, you better know your history. Because if you don't, and there's some person that has only lived there 80 years and 10, they've only lived there, or 80 years and 10, I guess that's the phrase. They've only lived one lifetime. That's not enough to know how things are going to turn out. You need a historian's long vantage point so that as civilizations work in the laboratory of history, they start coming to an understanding of the most healthy ways to live. That's not to say we can't learn from the future, but it is saying we've got to be willing to learn from the past. You with me so far? If so, this next sentence is the part that I wanted my son to understand. A youth boiling with hormones will wonder why he should not give full freedom to his sexual desires. And if he is unchecked by custom, morals, or laws, he may ruin his life before he matures sufficiently to understand that sex is a river of fire that must be banked and cooled by 100 restraints if it is not to consume in chaos both the individual and the group. When I read that to my son, his jaw hit the floor. He said, "That's an incredible quote. Let me read that again." And to see this concept of the banking and cooling of the 100 restraints that history has provided to the river of fire that is human sexuality. That youth hasn't lived long enough to know that he's playing with fire. And it is fire that can consume him and leave what could have been a glorious future in ashes. Now, that's not to say that God cannot bring beauty from ashes. I believe in repentance wholeheartedly. But especially in aspects of sexuality, as President Benson used to say, better to prepare and prevent than repair and repent. I'm so grateful that my son wrapped his heart and soul around that, to the point that later he would talk about, it became almost our code phrase for short, banked and cooled. And if something was on TV that was starting to be inappropriate, sometimes he'd just go, "Oh, Dad, bank and cool." And we'd turn the channel. Or he talked about things he was hearing from friends at school and like, man, I feel bad for them. They didn't bank and cool. And so this idea of holding yourself accountable to the law of chastity for God's sake, for your significant other's sake. Again, there is power in repentance. Don't ever minimize that. And hold to the power of the atonement to prepare you to resist temptation when it comes. I am grateful for the law of chastity. I am grateful for the protection it has given me and my family. And I pray that we can turn to God for the power that we need to bank and cool the river of fire that is there. Now, there are still two other elements I want to talk about from the proclamation to the world on the family. And this next one can be a controversial one as well. So let's pray for the Spirit's help in wrestling with it. I'm going to boil it down to this question. Whose job is more important, mom's or dad's? Now, even the way I phrase that could be controversial. Are we talking traditional mom and traditional dad, or non-traditional? I guess maybe there's a better way to frame the question then. Let's not worry yet about moms and dads. Let's talk about in the home and outside the home. Is one of those more important than the other? And if we believe in what David O. McKay said, that no other success can compensate for failure in the home, if we believe what Harold B. Lee said, that the most important work we do will be within the walls of our own home, then hopefully that helps put in perspective that difference, that what happens in the home is what matters most, and what happens outside the home is really meant just to support what's going on within. I sometimes teach what I call the parable of the firewood. And picturing a husband and wife huddling together for shelter in a cave somewhere in the midst of a raging winter storm. They know they have to be able to keep a fire lit, or they and their children will freeze to death. But fires don't perpetuate themselves. You have to have firewood. And there's not enough in the cave to keep the fire perpetually lit. So that mother and father, trying to preserve their family's life, are going to have a conversation. Who's going to stay in the cave to make sure that they are nurturing the flame, carefully feeding sticks and twigs and kindling and logs, keeping the children safe, close enough to it that they are warm, far enough away from it they don't get burned? Who's going to do that? And then who's going to go outside the cave and brave the elements in order to gather more firewood? Now, there may be times that one will do it and the other will, and they'll switch and whatever it might be. But if you think about it in terms of the parable, which is the more important role to play? If you think about it, all that matters is the fire, because what it offers the family. The firewood, it's merely means to a greater end. Yes, somebody has to go out and gather it. But the point of gathering it is to burn it so we can preserve life. Based on that parable, I worry. Have we turned things in our commercial age to the thought of stockpiling firewood is what it's all about? And whoever can amass the biggest pile wins. In fact, if that's the case, why burn it in the first place? And we lose sight of what the firewood was for to begin with. In fact, if it's just those children that have to stay warm, then they're part of the problem. It's because of them that we're burning down our supply. And in fact, if they weren't in the cave to be taken care of, both the husband and the wife could go out and gather firewood simultaneously. That'd be amazing. And then we can stockpile as much as we want. Burn less, stockpile more. Need fewer people, and just get as many gatherers as possible. Are you following the analogy? Are we so focused on bread winning that we're not concerned about feeding anyone with the bread? Are we trying to amass all of those P's, pride and prosperity and popularity and prestige, at the expense of the F's, like faith and family? What are we doing? And so whether you're a husband or a wife, whether you're a father or a mother, what are our priorities? Because if we have them set, then the next paragraph might not be quite as controversial as we sometimes make it. This is the second half of the 7th paragraph, which says, by divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness, and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. In these sacred responsibilities, fathers and mothers are obligated to help one another as equal partners. Disability, death, or other circumstances may necessitate individual adaptation. Extended families should lend support when needed. Now, when I was 20 and the proclamation was first read, it quickly became a mnemonic device for the young men in the group that as a father, there were 3 P's I was responsible for: preside, provide, and protect. And the provide and protect is a lot of what I'm describing in terms of going out and gathering the firewood. I've got to provide for my family. I've got to protect them from the howling winds and the snowdrifts that are piling up outside. I need to provide for them spiritually and temporally, like we saw in a previous paragraph. It's the preside that has become controversial. And what do we mean by that? If you think about Genesis, we've seen a lot of verses or ideas from Genesis already. There's the phrase that a woman's desire would be to her husband and he would rule over her. That was part of the curse, quote unquote, on Eve for partaking of the fruit. Well, that has never sat well with us, though it has been used as justification for horrible things ever since. Thankfully, President Kimball said preside would be a much better word there. The husband does not rule over the wife, but he does preside. But even that has become more controversial, which is why I'm so grateful for the other phrase in the same paragraph, equal partners, which ought to help us clarify what presiding even means. Now, here's a contrary that's hard to prove. How do we put preside and equal partnership in the same paragraph? Well, in some ways, it's similar to what we saw in section 84 about 107, that's it. Section 107 about the presiding quorums of the church. That these presiding quorums are equal in authority, but each one functions under the direction of another. Now, I'm not saying that that's exactly how the family's working. All I'm saying is that there is a contrary there that needs to be proven. And when it comes to church leadership, how do you balance under the direction of with equal in authority? Well, in a similar vein, in a family, husband and wife, as a father, for example, how do I balance presiding with equal partnership? Is it partnership in presiding? If you think about a bishop in a ward council, seems like the old model was, the bishop's in charge, and he gathers the ward council so he can delegate responsibility. I have the answers, but you all need to share the work. That is not the model we follow. The way that ward councils are supposed to work with a presiding authority in the bishop is not, I have the answers and I'm delegating responsibilities. No, it's you all have answers. And my job is to coax them out of everyone so we can piece together the scattered revelation God has given us all into one coherent picture. Hopefully it's the picture on the puzzle box that God has in heaven. You with me? So as a presider, what's my responsibility? To make sure that my wife feels like a completely equal partner. There will be times where, again, delegating authority is not the issue. It's a matter of making sure we are on the same page. I've sometimes joked, what kind of a car would it be if the steering wheel was on one side and the gas and brake was on the other? And the husband and wife sit whichever side you want to be on. But this car's going nowhere until we become unanimous in our decision. Remember, that's D&C 107 also. Decisions must be made unanimously. So presiding, in fact, if you go back to that Genesis original, ruling over, as my Hebrew professor said, that one possible retranslation of that is not ruling over, but rather ruling with. That's not the general translation because there's no models of ruling with other people in the ancient world. But what if from the start that was the model God intended for a marriage? That the husband would not rule over the wife, but that the husband would rule with the wife. Because if you think about our doctrine, the only place that a husband would ever rule over anything is in the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. And the only way to obtain that blessing is to have a wife with whom to rule. The patriarchal order of the priesthood is thus a matriarchal order of the priesthood as well. and to have those equal partners functioning hand in hand. There may be times where husband and wife decide that the only way we're going to survive this winter is if, for a time, we both go out and gather firewood. It's come to that. We have to. There might need an individual adaptation, as was said. Extended families. Maybe we can have grandma or grandpa come and keep the flame alive and keep the children warm while we go out and gather more firewood. But we can never get to a point where we think that the stockpile, that the firewood pile is more important than the flame that we're nursing within. I hope that analogy makes sense. There is so much more that we need to do to improve in this area, whether that's on a ward level, in ward council, or more importantly, in a family council, where the wife is not the vice president, but that husbands and wives are equal partners, presiding and nurturing together in love and righteousness. That will be the best possible outcome for whatever children are in that home, looking at both mom and dad as if they were one person. Remember, creation divides these two. The fall further differentiates and divides them in negative ways. Atonement makes them one. And that's exactly what husbands and wives are supposed to be in the family. Now, the last thing is that family itself. How do we make the family the kind of place we'd want to perpetuate forever? I remember teaching the doctrine of eternal family on my mission to some people, and they were scared by the doctrine. They're like, "Ugh, yikes, I have to be stuck with these people forever?" Like, okay, well, that suggests there's some more improvement to do on earth before that even becomes a possibility, okay? No one's going to be stuck with people they don't want to be with. That's not what sealing ordinances do. But if we do want the same sociality to exist among us here or there that exists among us here, but coupled with glory, then maybe we need to make this sociality a lot more glorious. Now, how do we do that? That's the question. G.K. Chesterton is one of my favorite writers, and he used an analogy once about, imagine coming down the chimney into a home of total strangers and being expected to get along really, really well with everyone there. Can you imagine that? And then he said this, essentially, that's what happened the day you were born. Picture it. You basically came down the chimney. You popped into existence surrounded by a mom and a dad and brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins. Welcome to the family, little stranger. I hope you can learn to love us all as we learn to love you. I loved that analogy. Chesterton was a genius. And to think about learning to love one another like that, where we were thrown together by some divine design, I'll give it that. But here we are. I came down this particular chimney. I popped into existence among a group of Halversons. Now I guess I'm one of them. How can I make this family the kind of group I'd want to spend eternity with? Well, look at the middle of the 7th paragraph. And here's the answer. Happiness in family life is most likely to be achieved when founded upon the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's as simple as that. You want a celestial family? Follow the celestial one himself. Follow Jesus. It explains successful marriages and families are established and maintained, and both of those are key. Let's start right and then continue right. Establish it and then maintain it on the following principles. Principles of faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and wholesome recreational activities. That's a beautiful list. It's sometimes, to me, it helps me remember if I couple them. And then they stick in my mind a little bit better. And they're some powerful pairs. Take faith and prayer as the first two. If I have faith and I pray in faith for my family, it's this acknowledgement that I know I can't do this on my own. I need all the help that I can get. we're imperfect people. We all popped in down the same chimney, but at different times and with different personalities, and there's nature and there's nurture and there's intertwining agencies and possible friction and everything else. Yikes. So I'm going to have the help of heaven. Have faith in your family. Pray for your family every chance that you can. Individual prayers for the family, family prayers for each other. There's power in a child hearing their parents pray for them by name. The next pair, repentance and forgiveness. We see how those two come together. And if there's ever a place where repentance and forgiveness will be needed constantly, it's within a family. I mean, friction happens because there's contact. And as we all came down the same chimney, we really need to learn to love one another, which will require forbearance and forgiveness. The lubricant of love is what Elder Maxwell used to call it. That helps deal with the friction that happens within a family. The next group, let's put three together: respect, love, and compassion. There's Christ-like attributes. If you think about respect, one of the 10 Commandments is children honoring their parents. But I think they deserve us to reverse it as well. Parents honoring children. Do we respect each other in our various roles in terms of what a person's up against, what they're trying to accomplish? Is there at least bedrock, I respect you, even though we might not agree on everything? Well, then take respect up a notch and let's call it love, that lubricant I just mentioned. Think about 1 Corinthians 13, that love, charity, suffereth long and is kind and doesn't think evil. It rejoices in truth. It handles anything. It never fails. If the family is failing, perhaps love failed at some point. So work on love and work on compassion. Calm with passion, feeling, suffering. We're going to go through this together. In some ways, this is beautiful crescendo from respect to love to true compassion when somebody is going through something hard and they need you. It's times when love is least deserved, but most needed. And family, I joked with my mom once. I said, family are the people that will put up with you when no one else will. Family are the ones that come to the rescue when no one else wants to. We're in this thing together, and there is compassion no matter what. And then the final two, a beautiful set of contraries to prove: work and recreation. That a family that can work together and play together, that both sides of that are together on this. Think about the pioneers as they were crossing the plains. Talk about a big extended family that was working all day to just make one step ahead of the other. But then at night, even though they're exhausted, strike up the band, pull out the fiddle, let's dance, let's sing, let's play together. And talk about a happy family that can do both. Honestly, our families deserve our very best efforts. Because what happens if they don't receive them? Look at the 8th and 9th paragraphs. The end of the 8th paragraph just warned about immorality, lack of chastity, and then says, further, we warn that the disintegration of the family will bring upon individuals, communities, and nations the calamities foretold by ancient and modern prophets. Think about all the family feuds throughout history that have affected individuals and then communities and then nations, with calamity everywhere you can see. Think about the family feud between Isaac and Ishmael that has now, and what's the aftermath been between Jews and Muslims. To think about the family feud between Jacob and Esau, with Israel and Edom fighting ever since. To think about family feuds between, Russia and Ukraine. There's such a common culture. Think about the family feud in the United States with civil war, North versus South, or continuing civil wars between left and right, and Republicans and Democrats. So how'd you do with your Thanksgiving family dinner? Did you make sure politics didn't come up because of friction in the family? Or will we do all within our power? Faith and prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work together, play together, make the family whole. If we can do that, avoiding the disintegration that is threatening the family as we speak, then the blessings will extend from individuals to communities to nations as well. With that in mind, the final paragraph calls us to action. We call upon responsible citizens and officers of government everywhere to promote those measures designed to maintain and strengthen the family as the fundamental unit of society. There's individually and institutionally, whether personally or politically. We've got to do this together. And we've got to support the family. It's not just the family supporting government, it's government needing to support the family. I am grateful for a prophet who has fought for that long and hard in President Oaks. I am grateful for the signatures of the 15 prophets, seers, and revelators I find at the bottom of this magnificent document, this proclamation, this declaration of the kind of family we need to focus on. Whether that's the relatively small group that congregates around your dinner table, or the extended family of God that covers the globe. We've got to support the family. And if we do so, God will support us. I'll close this lesson today with a quote from President Packer from that same talk I've quoted several times already today, April of 1994. He said this, "The family is very much alive and well in the church. Hundreds of thousands of happy families face life with an unwavering faith in the future. The family is safe within the church. We are not in doubt as to the course we must follow. It was given in the beginning, and guidance from on high is renewed as need may be. As we continue on our course, these things will follow as night the day." And he lists 3 powerful promises. This is what will come. First, the distance between the church and a world set on a course which we cannot follow will steadily increase. And we're seeing that. Again, the fact that the proclamation has gone from doctrine to controversial statements lets us know just how far the world how much the world has changed and how much the church must refuse to. The second promise, some will fall away into apostasy, break their covenants, and replace the plan of redemption with their own rules. And that moral relativism, when it comes to family dynamics, we are seeing, and there's never been a faster change on the societal level than with these issues over the past 30 years. And then the third promise, and this is the one I am so grateful for. Across the world, those who now come by the tens of thousands will inevitably come as a flood to where the family is safe. The proclamation to the world is meant to be exactly that. Proclaiming to any person in the world that wants to find safety and security for their family. It's found within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's found within the covenants we make within temples. It's found within the gospel of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and found within the love and invitation of heavenly parents that want to bring their family home. Now, if we can wrestle with the proclamation, if we can be patient and loving and understanding toward people that disagree with portions of it, if we can try to understand where they're coming from and hope that they'll understand where we're coming from, if we can prove contraries between love and law, truth and tolerance, chastity and charity, however you describe it, then I hope that we can find peace in our homes and in our families. I'm going to run through just a very short list of one-liners from this document. Each one is worth pondering and wrestling with yourself, and then we'll close this week's lesson. central to the Creator's plan, created in the image of God, heavenly parents, divine nature and destiny, identity and purpose, earthly experience, progress toward perfection, united eternally, potential for parenthood, multiply and replenish, sacred powers, divinely appointed, the sanctity of life, a solemn responsibility, a sacred duty, accountable before God. The family is ordained of God. Honor marital vows with complete fidelity. Happiness in family life. By divine design. In love and righteousness. Equal partners. Individual adaptation. Calamities foretold. Maintain and strengthen the family. The fundamental unit of society. Oh, based on that last phrase, I suppose we could also say it's the fundamental unit of the celestial kingdom. It's what we left our family in order to return to our family, bringing our family with us. If I can be allowed a moment to be personal, I just want to express thanks to my Father in heaven for my family, imperfect as we are. Struggling with difficulties and challenges. Oh, it's been an adventure. My wife sometimes introduces us when we move into a new area. Says, hello, we're the Halversons, and we're a mess. But I'll take my messy family life over something easier but lonelier. I'm grateful for the kind of dad my children have helped me become. And I pray they'll be patient with me as I keep trying to make improvements. I'm grateful for a wife who has dogged determination to just celestialize all of us, and an absolute refusal to give up on anyone, no matter how much someone might be struggling. Family is where the rubber hits the road. Family is what introduces us to our truest selves. Family holds a mirror up to us that shows every blemish, but also gives us the space and the grace to work on those things. Family is a blessing. And no wonder we're blessed with families on earth. That's what we've always been, the family of God.
Thanks so much for listening to Unshaken, a proud member of the Faith Matters podcast network. You can learn more about Faith Matters and check out our other shows at faithmatters.org.